The fight for delegates in Tuesday's New York primary is intense, with candidates still battling for delegates. But this race isn't just pitting candidate against candidate, it's also pitting New York voters in the city versus New York voters in upstate. Albany's Times Union Government Bureau Chief Casey Seiler joins us live via Skype. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
The more that I read your work, I'm not sure if it's even fair just to say two. I think it's more fair to say that there's a number, maybe even 24 micro primaries. Can you explain some of the intricacies to some of our viewers here?
As John Roberts noted before, you're not just talking about one statewide primary. You're talking about 27 congressional districts where all of these races will be fought out on both sides. The Republican math, as previously discussed, is very interesting. You've got 3 delegates per district. In many of those Republican districts, there are a very small number of Republican voters, especially downstate in New York City. So, the media war there is going to be intense and fought out in very small areas. Whereas upstate, the districts can tend to sprawl, especially when you're talking about what's known as the North Country, the Adirondacks. So you've got very big rural centers, but you've also got population centers such as, of course, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester, and here in what's known as the Capital Region, which is Albany, Schenectady, Troy, and Saratoga. That's why you've seen so many of the Republican candidates, as well as Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, holding rallies up here. Over the course of 8 days, we had all 5 candidates coming to town for town halls or for rallies. On one day, last Monday, we had 3 of them, Sanders and Trump, who held huge rallies, and Kasich, who held a very well-attended town hall at a local high school. So it's really amazing.
Now, I want to ask you...
New York usually doesn't matter.
Right. No, and that's why if you love primary politics, this is the election year for you, because you can get really an unbelievable story in each state that we see a contest. But I want to ask you a little bit about how voters there are reacting to this onslaught of candidates. Like you said, New York hasn't necessarily been in the spotlight, but when I read some of your work, you said New York voters are less moved by culture war issues than voters in other states. So what do they want to hear from candidates, and how can they be won over?
I think the issues in New York right now are really pocketbook issues. On the Democratic side, you're hearing a lot of talk. We certainly heard it in the Brooklyn debate about the $15 minimum wage. The path to a $15 minimum wage was just approved in the enacted state budget. That only happened about 3 weeks ago. So that's a very hot issue on the Democratic side, especially among what you might call progressives and even more progressives. On the Republican side, there's certainly a lot of talk about exports, a lot about trade policy, and a lot about upstate, what you're going to do to bring manufacturing back. The manufacturing base of upstate has really been racked by globalism. That plays right into the hands of especially Donald Trump, who has talked about the bad trade deals. Bernie Sanders has used that rhetoric as well. That's resonating, certainly. There are kind of localized issues on the Democratic side. You're hearing a lot about hydrofracking. Sanders and Clinton have jousted over that. New York State banned hydrofracking effectively about 2.5 years ago, but it still remains an issue. It's
right.
Something that business groups, of course, want to see. They believe it could be, the salvation of upstate. Whereas on the left, you see environmentalists who are dead set
Sure.
against it, even in sort of a partial way.
Well, Casey Seiler, I sure wish we could talk to you a little bit longer. We're up against a hard break, but it's really, really interesting. Thank you so much for joining us and bringing us your expertise.
My pleasure.
Thanks.
Anytime.